I want to introduce our moderator tonight, Supervisor Dave Pine of the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors. He's probably a familiar face to a lot of folks in the room. He's been a public servant in San Mateo County for many, many years, and he's a fierce climate and environmental advocate. He was one of the founding members of Peninsula Clean Energy and sits on the boards of many other environmental and climate organizations, such as the SF Bay Conservation and Development Commission. And he was instrumental recently in passing the resolution to declare a climate emergency in San Mateo County. In short, he's one of the key reasons why San Mateo is leading the country on so many climate and environmental issues. And he's also a really nice guy. We're thrilled to have him moderating the event tonight. With that, I'll introduce Supervisor Dave Pine.
Thank you, Sundance. I'm really thrilled to be here. There's no more important issue than facing the climate challenge. Sadly, we've put so much carbon into the atmosphere. We're seeing the effects of that every day around the world. And the future could be much worse, depending on the type of policies that we implement here in the state and around the world. California, of course, has been a leader and has shown the world the way forward, but there's much more to be done. So again, it's a privilege to be here. It's fantastic that all these groups came together to organize this forum. It's amazing to have such a big crowd, and we're also fortunate to have terrific candidates running for this seat. So let me tell you a little bit about how we'll organize the forum tonight, and then we'll have our candidates join us. So we'll begin with each candidate having 2 minutes to make an opening statement. We'll then move to questions. So all the groups got together and gave a lot of thought to the questions to ask the candidates. So we'll begin with a set of 5 questions where the candidates will each have 1.5 minutes to address each question. After that, we will have a little bit of a lightning round with some yes/no questions. And then we'll turn to a second set of questions, which will be a combination of questions the group has thought of and questions that have been submitted this evening from the audience. And we'll have the candidates speak a little more briefly to those questions for about 1 minute. And we'll wrap up with candidate closing statements of 1 minute to wrap up the evening. So with that, let me welcome the candidates. If you all want to just come out here and we'll introduce you. We got Michael Brownrigg, City Council member. That's right.
So we know where we're supposed to sit.
Okay, candidates. Nice job finding your seats. Starting on my left, I guess on your right, we have Burlingame City Council member Michael Brownrigg. Next, we have Josh Becker, who is chairman of Ex Machina. We have Alex Glew, president and CEO of Glew Engineering Consulting. Shelley Masur, Redwood City Council member, and former State Assembly member Sally Lieber. So again, candidates, we'll begin with up to 2 minutes in opening statement. And we'll start with Sally and move to my left. And we have a timekeeper here who will show you how you're doing with the time. And Sally, the floor is yours.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out here tonight and thank all of the sponsoring organizations. It was great to hear all those organizations named when we were just backstage. And it really was a great reminder of what a rich environmental organization landscape we have here on the peninsula. And it's so, so important. And I think that we can become a real model for conservation, for addressing climate collapse and reversing the impacts of it. And I'm so thankful that these questions are being addressed in this forum here tonight. I've served on City Council and as Mayor of Mountain View and as a County Commissioner before going on to the State Assembly. And despite all the cynicism that I think can be the easiest go-to about government, I found that there were really wonderful opportunities to do good things in terms of environmental policy at each one of those levels. And I'm thankful for those opportunities, and I know that I can do much more in the State Senate. And so I am eager to work with each of you to surface the issues that are the most important for the Bay Area and for California overall, and to make our region really a model as it should be environmentally. So thank you so much.
Is it on? There we go. I was gonna say, the next question is, can I get the mic to work? Well, thank you all for being here. It's so awesome to see such a full room talking about climate. It's super important, obviously. What I like to say is, if you want to know where somebody's gonna go, take a look at where she's been. So I want to tell you a little bit where I have been and what I know to be true about our community. Many of you who know me know that I've been an activist protecting women's health clinics and working in reproductive health care for many years after getting my master's in public health. That you know that I've been a nonprofit leader, serving homeless women and their children, working with vulnerable youth, and leading a statewide education nonprofit. That I've been a fighter for public education as a mom and then as a school board member for 10 years in Redwood City. And that I've been an advocate for a path out of poverty as a Redwood City council member and now vice mayor, raising the minimum wage, creating affordable housing, increasing access to high quality affordable childcare, and building a sustainable community. But many of you don't know that I was actually raised for a good portion of my life in Alaska. And I was raised by young parents and some grandmothers who came out of the Depression. And so when that's your life experience, you're raised with sort of a conservation mindset. So reduce, reuse, recycle. And our home was this mantra well before we all were saying it publicly. But it was all about individual action. It was about doing the things we could do individually to make a difference. But as my daughter reminded me recently, if you want to make change and you want to really address the climate crisis, it is going to require systemic change. And so that's why I'm proud to have taken that mindset and used it as a school board member when we introduced solar panels, and most recently as a city council member on Monday night when we directed our staff to move forward with REACH codes in Redwood City. As I said that night, I don't know how we look out into the audience of teenagers and all of the people advocating and not do something. I look forward to talking about the actions I can take with you as a state senator. Thank you.
Did you see Russia from where you live in Russia?
It's great to be here tonight with people who I hope want to do something. My name is Dr. Alex Glew. By 2030, we need to lower our GHG by 45%. Germany tried 40% by 2020 and only hit 32. Some consider that a failure. I consider that leadership. It's something we should be offering the world. I've built an engineering business and know how tech works. I have excellent training, a BS and MS from Berkeley in mechanical engineering, a master's and a PhD from Stanford in materials science. Carbon was in my dissertation. I'm an environmentalist, but I don't really make a big deal out of it. I've used cloth grocery bags since the 80s. I have 3 kilowatts on my roof for 20 years now. I don't have central AC. I commute 2 miles to work. In 2019, I tried to introduce the dividend program into the GOP platform at the state convention. I'll listen to anything that works. Here's what I think we need to do roughly. Petroleum is 36% of our energy. It needs to be reduced by about 2/3. Coal is 13%. It needs to be eliminated. Natural gas produces half of the CO2 of coal and about 30% less than petroleum. Temporarily, we need to lean a little more heavily on natural gas to offset the first two. Renewable energy is 11% of our energy. It should at least be doubled. I'd be happy if it was tripled. Nuclear is 8%. We should consider doubling that. It's not renewable, but for the time being, it doesn't produce CO2. We need to implement the CCL fee and dividend program. It insulates the bottom 60% of the population economically from the cost of energy that will increase. It motivates conservation and innovation. Basically, we need HR 763. We need to conserve energy. Transportation is 36%. We need aluminum vehicles, just like airplanes. We need hybrids and EVs. We can cut our car emissions in half with those measures alone. Mass transit and accommodation for electric scooters for the last half mile. Buildings, again, better insulation, triple pane windows, and heat exchangers 6-to-1 COP or better. My name is Dr. Alex Glew. I hope that sticks with you.
Wow, you are an amazing sight. My name is Josh Becker. My wife John and I are raising 2 teenagers, so I appreciate any thoughts, advice, or prayers you have on that front. Actually, my daughter goes to this very school, and we just registered my son today, and I'm doing this for them. As the ancient, the Native American proverb goes, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And let's be honest, we're not being very good stewards right now. That's why, as my t-shirts say, we need to prioritize climate now. And I'm running to not just be a good vote on environment and climate, but to be the statewide leader on environment and climate in the state Senate. And I believe that California is the hope for our country, but also the hope for the world. I'm passionate about this issue, I'm committed, and I prioritize it in my own life. And let me give you a quick snapshot. I started out going door to door for an environmental group in college. I consulted for EPA out of college, and then worked on the Hill for an environmental congresswoman. After Stanford, I started a clean energy investment fund. We brought to market many pioneering energy innovations. I started clean tech and green business leaders for Obama to rally people nationally. I ran for assembly in 2010 as a green energy entrepreneur. And then I got even more local. I joined the board of Menlo Spark here, and very proud, Menlo Park, we passed the first fossil fuel-free building ban. And then, yes, and then 12 cities have joined and 14 more coming this year. I just released a comprehensive climate plan with 73 local leaders and national leaders like Ed Markey from the Green New Deal. This is a collaborative approach, and that's the approach that I hope to bring to this issue. We need to bring the ideas from this district up to the state Senate. I will do, and we need someone who can make them a reality. I will do that. Look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Michael Brownrigg, and I hope to be your next state senator. I think the environmental issues we confront in the district, in the state, and in the planet are urgent and vital. Here are the big environmental goals that I've set in my pledge to you. When I reach the Senate, I promise we will accomplish 2 zeros and 3 100s. By 2030, and in some cases sooner, we must achieve 0 carbon electric energy, 0 plastic to landfill, 100% clean drinking water for everybody, 100 billion in Bay Area transit investments, and 150 billion gallons of fresh water restored annually to rivers and aquifers. That's about 450,000 acre feet, or close to 10 times what San Francisco uses every year. Now listen, those aren't easy targets. I understand that, but they're realistic with courage and conviction, and that's what I will bring to the challenges. Indeed, I submit to you that nobody up here has more experience or more relevant experience to handle these kind of hard issues than I do. Over 30 years in government, 12 years as a US diplomat, 18 years in local government, I have consistently sought out the toughest problems. Over 10 years on city council, twice serving as mayor, I pushed for affordable housing and green infrastructure. I helped develop the first green building codes, I co-wrote our first climate action plan, and I liberated our beekeepers. Very proud of that. Regionally, I lead a zero waste task force for our garbage board that serves 100,000 homes in our region, and as a result of that work, We are opening new technology to eliminate organic waste that goes to landfill and creates methane. We're going to turn it into biogas to run new Recology garbage trucks. We could be one of the first net zero carbon garbage facilities in the state, and improve recycling without adding $1 to garbage rates. I hope that by the end of the night you can be as hopeful as I am, that we really can take carbon out of the atmosphere and bend the climate arc, that we can get plastic out of our oceans and our bodies and give every Californian access to ubiquitous clean energy, clean water, and good organic food. I get it. I'll get it done. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statements, and we'll now move to our questions, which again were prepared by the groups that organized tonight's event. So the first set of questions, the first 5, we'd like to keep your responses to 1.5 minutes. So, first off, there are a multitude of issues a state senator can work on in Sacramento. In priority order, what are your top 3 legislative priorities when you serve in the Senate? So we'll start this time with Shelley Masur and proceed to my left.
I have to be careful of all the water bottles here. I don't want to have a water bottle accident. So for me, the reason I decided to run for state senate was actually public education, and by the way, I'm going to say these, and I see them all as connected to climate. So public education, one of the things that we did at the organization that I was the CEO of for 5.5 years was convene an environmental literacy task force, which set out goals for environmental literacy across the state. So if we're not teaching our kids and helping them make decisions about the future of our state and our country and our world, then we are going to have a hard time moving forward in a positive direction. Number 2 is public health. I said I have a master's in public health. Clearly, health and climate are intertwined. If we are not addressing the impacts of climate change, we are going to continue to erode the health of our communities, and particularly vulnerable communities. And the 3rd is housing and transportation together. And I will say this probably multiple times tonight, but in my vision, housing policy and transportation policy are climate policy. We have to move to dense housing and build our public transportation infrastructure. If we don't do that, all of the goals that all of us have talked about already up here are not going to be possible.
My 3 top priorities to work on would be healthcare, environmental issues, and transportation. And they're all linked in many ways. For healthcare, we simply need to reduce the cost of healthcare. There's a professor named Sean Flynn who wrote a book called The Cure That Works, and how you reduce healthcare costs by 50%. Singapore has gone to this model, and some American companies have done what they can. But you should have a choice when you buy healthcare and know what it costs. Everybody should have a health savings plan. People are smart, they know how to manage their money, but when they go to the physician, they just don't care what it costs. Who shops like that? You don't do that anywhere else in your life, and it shouldn't be in healthcare. So we need to reduce the cost. With the 50% cost reduction, healthcare would not be an issue. Secondly, you've heard my environmental issues, but in particular, I have a lot of expertise in factories and gas analysis. I've consulted for the prime contractor to the EPA on gas measurements for factories. I know what goes on in industry, and I know quite a bit about the building industry too. Lastly, transportation. Transportation is linked with the environment, and it's linked with housing. We need more transportation that is efficient. We need mass transit, we need roads where we need them. Being stuck in traffic is not environmental. At 66 minutes, we have the 2nd worst commute in the country. That's not right for a great state like California.
John.
Well, for me, climate is the top of any priority we can have as a people. Our children's future and their children's future depends on the urgency with which we act. After that, for me, transportation and housing solutions, which I see as related, and education. I'm really proud that my focus on environment and climate has earned me the sole endorsement of the California League of Conservation Voters and a dual endorsement of the Sierra Club. We have such an opportunity. Again, California is the 5th largest economy in the world. So what we do matters here and also beyond our borders. And my background, I think, can help us move rapidly and understand how to do that economically. What's amazing today is the progress that we've made. The cost of solar with battery storage now beats all other forms of energy today. It's really now about deployment and commercialization. What are we going to do with our cap and trade system, our renewable energy standard, our zero emission vehicle mandate? We've done a good job of electrifying our grid. Now, how are we going to plug our transportation sector into the grid? It's really every dimension of our economy, including ag tech and clean energy investment. That's all part of my plan, and I look forward to discussing this more with you today.
Thanks. I hope you forgive me. I'm not Oprah, but I find it easier to talk standing up. It's easy to answer the question because at the 90 house parties we've done around this district, I talk about a mnemonic, the ACE agenda: affordability, climate, and education. Those are all crucial. Affordability for our district, education for our state, climate for our planet. I'm going to focus just on two of them. So affordability, quickly, is about housing and transit. I feel like our communities are eroding out from under us. If we don't have a place for our teachers, for our nonprofit providers, for our essential service providers, for our kids, then we don't have communities anymore. I won't let that happen. We have to work hard on that. But I'm going to focus more time on climate. So I said earlier, zero carbon energy. What does that mean? The state right now has set 2045 to get to basically zero carbon energy. Here's the problem. If the richest, greenest government in the world, the state of California, can't get to zero carbon energy until 2045, then the rest of the country doesn't get there till 2075, and the developing world, where most of these emissions will come from, won't get there till the 2100s. And that's game over for our kids and our grandkids. That's why we can't let that happen. That's why we have to move that target up to 2030 and be aggressive about it. Finally, the flip side to climate change, even if we can put the brakes on, is sea level rise. Thank you, Dave Pine, for creating the flood agency. We need to protect our district, which is at the greatest financial risk to sea level rise. That has to be a high priority for the senator.
All right, with our next question.
I think that addressing... I think that addressing the climate crisis and climate collapse has to be job one, and we have to do everything in our power to reverse it. This is an existential issue and crisis for humankind. The planet will go on, but we will have terrible consequences in terms of wars, in terms of illness, conflict, all kinds of negative outcomes until we're extinct, like many of the species. And so there's so much that we can do. And in so many ways, the Bay Area is ground zero for the impacts, like sea level rise. We've just seen in the recent days a little bit of a glimpse of that with the king tides. In the future, we can have severe and not just periodic, but more frequent flooding in the Bay Area, and we need to have planned retreat. I also want to see our state and our region have more of an emphasis on economic justice, environmental justice, and opportunity. There is no way that we can succeed with 25% of children in deep poverty in California, and we have to work to turn that around. I really think that getting California out of the bottom 5 in education funding and into the top 5 is a critical part of that. So that's something that I want to work on in a very intensive way. And then I agree with so many of the other folks who mentioned housing and homelessness that we need to address.
Okay, so our next question will start with Alex. Many of the measures that households could adopt to reduce their carbon footprints have high upfront costs. For example, electric vehicles are still relatively expensive, rooftop solar, retrofitting for making your home electric. What can be done to ensure that less well-off households can enjoy the resiliency and health benefits of these sort of measures?
Thank you. To address solar first, energy is much more efficiently produced in large quantities, not little batches. Whether or not it actually makes economic sense to have solar on everybody's house is really questionable. Energy needs to be produced cleanly, but that should be done by experts. There are other things that can be done very inexpensively for houses. Windows account for 7 times as much energy loss as your walls. People need triple pane windows. People change windows all the time. We just need to make sure that when they do it, it's the right kind. Insulation is also a very inexpensive way to do it. The other big area is heating. There's something called a heat exchanger. You pull heat out of the air, out of the ground, out of your swimming pool, out of somewhere, and you turn electricity back into heat. That's kind of easy to do. It's efficient. Coefficient of performances are 3 or 4 now. With CO2 charged ones, they can be 5 or 6 or 7. So we need to make those things that are the 80-20 rule, I call it. That which gives us the most, we need to do that way. Cars are turned over quite often. Most people aren't driving cars that are 15 years old. So when people go to cars, they just need to go to hybrid and EV, and we need to make sure those are offered in large quantities so they're competitive. So it's not going to be perfect, but applying a common sense rule of what gets the biggest bang for the buck is how we need to go about doing it.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks. I'm going to join folks in stepping up, mostly to get out of the glare of the lights. I think I don't know how my daughter does it on stage here with the theater. So the question is, again, I started and I lost my train of thought.
No problem. So many of the measures that homeowners can implement today to reduce cost money.
Yeah, thanks. So here, I'm really proud of my track record again. When I started in 2007 with Gary Kremen, who I think is in the audience, you had to do solar up front. You had to pay $30,000 if you wanted solar on your roof. And Gary said, hey, we're going to do this differently. We're going to finance solar over time and make it available to more people. And 50,000 roofs have been financed by Clean Power Finance, most of them by small mom and pop minority contractors who put the solar up. Same thing, we funded the first PACE loan, property assessed clean energy mortgage. This lets you do energy efficiency and clean energy and attach it to your home. So if you move, it stays with the home, around the home loan. So these are some of the things we've done to make this more affordable and increase the spread. But we need to do this. I agree with Sally 100% on environmental justice. I'm really proud that Full Circle Fund, which I started 19 years ago, a nonprofit that funds other nonprofits, gave an early grant to Grid Alternatives, now the nation's largest nonprofit solar installer. And Menlo Spark has worked with Grid Alternatives. We put solar on the roofs of 50 low-income communities in East Menlo Park and East Palo Alto. And again, we're scaling that across the country. The key is we can take all of these initiatives and scale them, and that's what I've done.
Thank you, Josh. I won't ask you about the 3 cabinet secretaries that we want to eliminate. Michael Brownrigg.
Thank you very much. I think it's a really important question. We have to make sure that everyone has the advantages of this new world. I mean, the good news here is that we have a choppy transition in front of us to that zero carbon energy future that I want to get us to. But at the other side of that transition, energy is ubiquitous, it is much cheaper, and it's clean. And it can be in microgrids, so it will be less expensive for everyone. So one, we need to get there, in part because that creates a social justice outcome. But we also have to be mindful of helping communities today. So I would propose expanding the PACE program so that if you want to have a battery pack, you can also use that and store energy during the day when it's cheap, when the solar is all running, and help less advantaged families tap into that energy. I also think that I joined a group called Elected Officials to Protect California. And this group has 2 missions. One is to eliminate oil and gas licensing in the state of California. We still do an awful lot of that. We're the 4th largest producer of oil in the country, I think, 4th or 5th. It's crazy. But it also says we need to protect our communities that are close to extraction and production of fossil fuels as long as they're here. And that is almost always less advantaged communities. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can lean in and help. Thank you.
I think what we're talking about here is really democratizing the benefits of the environmental movement, and this is something that is absolutely essential for us to do. When I was in the State Assembly, I successfully added more money for low-income people who wanted to change out a polluting car and get a less polluting vehicle. And those are the kinds of real-world things that we need to do for people of modest means to participate. I also feel like we have to support the efforts to increase job participation. When I was in the State Assembly, I authored the legislation to create the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority. And a couple of years ago, the voters, thank you, all of whom are here today, for approving Measure AA to provide $550 million in local funds to be matched with federal funds. Any project that's $1 million or more within that money is going to be union labor doing it. And that's what we need to have. Good jobs and environmentalism going hand in hand to benefit our communities to the maximum.
So, you know, I talked a second ago about environmental justice, and to me, this is about environmental justice. And so if we think about it from a couple of different angles, there is a piece about subsidizing the pieces that you need as an individual person, right? Subsidizing solar panels. Peninsula Clean Energy has been providing good rebates for buying electric cars, and those things are important. But we know that a good part of the reason why people of color and low-income people have been subject to difficult living conditions, environmentally undesirable living conditions, has to go back to our racist housing policies and the work that we have done to exclude them from society. And so I agree that the jobs are critical. As we're doing training for jobs, we need to make sure that they're accessible to everybody. That goes to the education piece. As we're considering health consequences of this, we need to ensure that we're bringing everybody into the conversation and that we're making sure everybody has clean drinking water, because in a state of this size, of this wealth, everybody should have clean drinking water, and that's just not the case. And the elected officials piece, which I'm also a part of, we all have to use our power to advocate for people who don't have access to power. And by using that, then we can bring them into the conversation and have them help be part of the solution.
So Josh, we'll start with you on the next question. And all of you have addressed this question to some degree, but it's an important one, so let me put it forward. So as a senator, what will you do to speed the transition to a low-carbon economy by 2030 in these next 10 years? And what changes, specifically, will you advocate for in current policy or in any changes in government structure?
Great. Well, I think the governor is doing some good work here, and I'm very proud to have the governor's endorsement. I served on his Clean Energy Advisory Task Force when he was mayor of San Francisco. And so recently he's put a couple of innovations in. One is, in this current budget, one is $1 billion green loan fund. The second is a $4.7 billion climate resiliency bond. And I think both these issues are critical if we're going to move forward. More specifically, some things to achieve climate neutrality earlier. One is strengthening our cap and trade system, and that would be with a quality adjusted price target. The second, our renewable energy standard. We currently have a goal of 60%, but that goal needs to be moved to 67% by 2030. And then our zero emission vehicle mandate. We really need to get to 80% of our light duty cars to be zero emission in order to hit our goals more quickly. Other things that we can do are things like carbon negative building materials. So if I'm up in the state senate, we're going to commit the government to use our procurement power of the government operations. So we have government be carbon neutral, our purchasing by carbon neutral by 2030, and commit to buying things like carbon negative cement and carbon negative building materials that can have an outsized impact across the country.
Thanks. So I don't think that's enough. I think we have to be much more aggressive. So what I would do is first I would establish a blue ribbon task force that of environmentalists, engineers, and financiers. And I give them 1 year to come up with how are we going to create 10 gigawatts of clean energy. It can either be production, zero carbon energy production, or storage, or both, within 5 years. And then we need to get on with it. If we're serious about hitting this 10-year mark, and I am, it's not enough to just tweak things. It's not enough to go from 60% to 67%. We need to fundamentally change it. And we can do that. So it's a three-legged stool. We have to change demand, and thank you to Citizens Climate Lobby for the tax and dividend approach. I think that's the right way to bend demand and take care of less advantaged families as you go through that transition. You have to change the supply. We need more supply of zero carbon energy. That can be offshore wind, it can be other things. We need to do it. And finally, we need to sequester carbon, and that's through smart agriculture and tree planting to begin pulling carbon out of the air. That's the only way. I mean, today was a historic day, right? Today, articles of impeachment were presented, the ERA was passed, yay, in Virginia, and that NASA confirmed yet again that this is the hottest decade on record, and we are going to blow through the 1.5 degrees within 10 years. So that's why we have to do this dramatically and urgently. And I'm absolutely passionate.
I think step one to addressing this is to leave the fossil fuels in the ground. We need an absolute ban on fracking and on any kind of injection of poisonous chemicals or water into the ground to get out natural gas and oil. And inherent in that is that we have to break up the influence of big oil in the state capital. You know, a couple years ago when the ban on fracking was up for a vote, I think it was over $200 million that petroleum interests spent in the state capital. And I am the only candidate up here who has signed the No Oil Pledge. So we have to have more people who are running for office who are willing to say no to oil money and no to the PACs that contain oil money. It's just what we have to do as a species to be able to survive. We also have to look at the efficiency of our water systems. Every time we see the movement of water, we need to read that that's energy use. And we need to get much more efficient and get off of the 70% reliance that we have on natural gas, which produces greenhouse gases, and make changes to our energy grid and to our storage capacity to deal with that.
So just to clarify, I have also said I'm not going to take money from oil companies, so let's put that out there to start with. The second piece, the first thing I think we really need to do is, this past year, Assemblymember Gloria introduced a bill that would have declared a climate crisis in California, and in doing that, it would move all of our carbon neutrality goals to 2030. So I think we need to pass that in the legislature. If it's not passed by the time I'm there, I will introduce it and work very hard to get it passed. Hopefully by that time, after we've watched an area the size of New York, larger than the size of New York, burning, the issue of the crisis will be in everybody's mind, and we'll all agree that we need to vote to declare a climate crisis in California and in this country, but at least we can control California. The second piece is, I'm going to sort of have this mantra about housing policy being climate policy. We have to continue to build close to transit. We have to build our transit infrastructure. If we don't do that, we're going to keep driving, and we have to have the jobs also close to transit, because otherwise we're going to have to keep driving from our house that's close to transit to our job that's not close to transit. So we have to continue to concentrate our building. And the third thing that California, I think, really needs to focus on is building its recycling infrastructure. Now that China will no longer take our garbage, I think California has an opportunity to both build the infrastructure to do our own recycling and also create jobs at the same time.
question is, how would we do it? I gave you some details already, and I'll go into a little more now. I have in front of me the EIA, which is the Energy Agency of the DoD, and they know exactly where energy goes. Transportation is 28.3%. What do we do? As I said, we need cars and transportation that use less energy. You start with lighter vehicles, aluminum. Aluminum is recyclable, aluminum is good. Airplanes are aluminum for a reason, cars need to be too. Even the Ford F-150 truck is now largely aluminum. And then of course we need to have hybrids in the transition time and EVs. Batteries are a whole environmental disaster unto themselves, and there's not enough materials to make batteries. Until we move to things like sulfur-coated carbon nanotubes for batteries, yes, I've had people in my office talking about these things. They have 6 times the capacity of what we have now. Until those actually exist, we really are not in a great position on car batteries. Industrially, it's too complicated to force one solution. With industry, what you do is you put a fee on them and say, figure it out or pay up. They'll figure it out. Residential and commercial are at 12% and 9.4%. What do you do with them? Well, most of their use at this point is heating and cooling. And that goes back to heat pumps and the need to use them. Better buildings, better windows, better insulation, and get off the oil and the gas and start using electric-powered heat pumps. They can have a 5-to-1 easy, 8-to-1, 10-to-1 or better, depending on the size and the chemical. Thank you. Alex Glew.
All right. I'd now like to move to a question that was put together by one of our youth groups, the Youth Climate Action Network. Or do we have any representatives from the ICANN group? And when we think about climate change and the challenges ahead, it's very sobering, but I think we've all been uplifted by the group, by the efforts and the voices of our young people. And so we really wanted to make sure we had some questions from them today. So this is the question from the Youth Climate Action Network. As young people, we have mobilized and plan to continue mobilizing to apply political pressure and raise awareness about the climate crisis. Would you be willing to work with youth groups to help us apply political pressure to both corporations and politicians around climate and environmental issues? And how would you go about doing that? So, candidates, help me out. Who's the next person? Mr. Brownrigg, thank you. And that's 90 seconds.
So I don't need 90, I'll probably take it because I'm a politician. But the answer is yes, absolutely. You are the most powerful spokespeople for the next generation because you are the next generation. I have had the great pleasure of working with some of the young people at March for Our Lives. They are fabulous. They are really good, and they have bent the arc on gun control in ways that nobody would have expected, certainly nobody my age would have expected. And they do that by just keeping on speaking up and insisting that people like me show up at meetings, and then they speak up and they speak up some more. And they're smart, and I bet you guys are too. I think this is the reason we're working on these issues. It's a little like they say about planting a tree. You don't plant a tree for yourself, you plant a tree for your children and your grandchildren. So we need to fix the climate for you. And I'm not sure, all I can say, I guess I'll close with this. So as a negotiator, I ran into a lot of people around the world, and one maxim from a European negotiator stuck with me. He said, if you ever want to get something done, you have to keep an open mind and an open door. So my door will always be open to you. I will welcome you and your passion and energy, and we will get this done.
I think the involvement of youth is absolutely critical. It's clear, I think, to all of us that you have the biggest stakes in this, and so your participation is absolutely essential. And I think that it's time for youth to be asking hard questions of electeds, and to stop asking electeds and candidates, what's your position on this? And start asking, what have you done? What concrete steps have you taken to demonstrate that this is actually important to you? And you deserve those answers. The other thing is, I want to encourage everybody to get into the offices of elected officials, to get into the offices of candidates, to start working with candidates in the community. When I was in the state assembly, we had more interns than any other office in the state legislature. And our youngest intern was in the 4th grade. And she could do things, and she was smart. She's now in law school, and she is every bit as passionate as she was the summer after the 4th grade. So there is no time when you're too young to start, and there's no time when you're too old to keep going. We got to keep going together. Thank you.
So in 2018, I worked with students from MA, Sequoia, Woodside, and Carlmont to help plan the March for Our Lives rally in Redwood City. I don't know how many of you were there, but we had close to 5,000 people there. And one of the things that we did when working with those young people who are now all in college, one of them who's still working on my campaign, is we agreed that the adults were going to be in the background and the young people were going to be the people speaking. Because they said to us, you know, you're a city council member, do you want to speak? And I said, no, because as soon as you let one of us speak, then you have to let a lot of us speak, and this march is about you guys. And so I feel the same way about climate. On Monday night, we were discussing at our council meeting, all electric buildings, we had a lot of young people come and speak to us. And my comment to my fellow council members, my colleagues, was, I don't know how we look in the faces of the young people who've come to talk to us and not take every single action that we can take. And for me personally, as a mom, I don't know how I look my kids in the eye and not get their input and take every single action that I can take, working with you all to find solutions to make sure that this planet is a planet that you all can grow up on, raise kids on, and have grandkids.
The short answer is yes, I would work to apply that pressure. Bear in mind, the government isn't supposed to run the country, exactly. The people run this country. This is our country. If you look at the numbers, 29% of the country believes we need to take immediate action on climate control. That's why nothing has happened in meaning in this country. So really what needs to happen is we need the people behind the climate control, not 29%, but 79%. Then it would be easy. And that's where we need to focus the efforts. So essentially, we need to not just put pressure on other politicians and on corporations. You can't just blame stuff on other people. You have to, understand that most people don't get it. You can look at yourself really quickly. If you're wearing tennis shoes, where are they from? They're probably from Asia, and they shipped 5,000 miles to come here. You look at a high school parking lot, it's filled with cars. In my day, who drove to school? Nobody. You walked, you took the bus, or you rode a bicycle. So basically, the youth need to start by setting examples themselves, and education, not just of the youth, but of everybody in society, across the boards, needs to understand what this is so that 29% becomes a strong majority. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the young people who are leading on this issue. I spent about 4 hours at De Anza yesterday. I spent a couple hours at Stanford today, and I'm so inspired by the young people who are leading on this issue. And many of them are here today. I want to thank all of them who are here supporting me in our Climate Now, Prioritize Climate Now t-shirts. Thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for your leadership. I started out as I said earlier, going door to door as a college student for the Bottle Bill and the Community Right to Know Act, and ultimately running a canvass. So welcome your efforts to help us go door to door as I go door to door and try to prioritize this issue. Last Friday I was with 100 MA students, And I won something called the Jefferson Award for starting Full Circle, which is a nonprofit that I mentioned we've had for 19 years. And I was giving Jefferson Awards to these, to the MA high school students for their service, including many of them who started an environmental club here. So you are inspiring us, but you know, and it's that pressure that's going to keep, that's going to move this issue forward. We only have 40 state senators. That's why California is such an opportunity to have an impact. Again, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. Things that we do here matter. They matter for the state, they matter for the country, they matter for the world. Thank you.
So we've talked a lot about efforts to reduce carbon. The next question goes to dealing with the impacts of climate change. So we'll begin with you, Sally. So the impacts of climate change are accelerating with fire, drought, sea level rise among the most significant, but not only impacts. So what should our approach be? What should the state's approach be to funding and dealing with these adaptation needs that are inevitable?
Well, I want to use this question to give thanks to Dave Pine. A lot of people don't realize that in addition to his job on the Board of Soups, he is very ably the chair of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, dealing with sea level rise and making the Bay Area a model for mitigation. And so thank you, Dave. And I think that that's where we need to be, is addressing those impacts, looking at not building further and further out into the bay, not building in inundation zones, and protecting the natural resources that we have. One of the questions that's come up in recent times is whether or not we should fill in the bay to build a new city, an extension of Redwood City for 40,000 people on restorable bay wetlands. And I can say that the developer would be long gone by the time the flooding gets here. And people of modest means and people who are desperately looking for housing in the Bay Area will buy just about any housing that's available. So we need to really stitch our environmental principles into everything that goes on in terms of planning our built environment, and really take it more than into account, make it an operating principle.
You guys have a lot of stamina clapping after every question. Thank you so much. So I think we need to talk about the mitigation efforts, certainly. Certainly in San Mateo County, we are the most at-risk county for sea level rise. Stood in the wrong place, I guess. And so working to continue to garner the funds from that were approved in Measure AA for the Bay. I've been sitting on the Bay Restoration Authority Advisory Council, thanks to Supervisor Pine, who will come up a lot in this conversation, I think. And working on approving projects to really improve our resiliency and our adaptation to sea level rise. But we also have to talk about forest management, because the wildfires are a critical component of all of this, and we have to figure out how we're going to keep from building in the wildland-urban interface, and how we're going to manage forest fires in the coming years. And we have to talk about our water supply. We have 2 different sources of water here in this Senate district. Primarily in San Mateo County, we get our water from the Hetch Hetchy. But in Santa Clara County, parts of Santa Clara County comes from different areas. And so that water supply in particular is going to be in danger in the coming years. And so we need to use the money that has been already identified, but also look at the climate bond that's being discussed, to see if we can pass a climate bond and use that money to help us address all of the mitigation measures we need to take.
I'm glad you're all still here. This isn't necessarily the cheeriest of subjects to discuss. If you look at the polar caps and they melt, you probably know off the top of your head, that's the equivalent of 83 meters of water, 240 feet. Do you really think we can withstand a 240-foot rise in sea level and push it back? No, we can't. I grew up in Pacifica. They couldn't even handle waves. They lost house after house after house when they come in. So we can't withstand this. We can't really deal with most of it. If the polar caps melt, just move away from the ocean because there's not going to be anything left. With smaller measures, a smaller rise in sea level, that's something maybe that's manageable. Water came up. Well, our water system is sort of crazy. There's plenty of drinking water. There's just not plenty of water to do all these other things with. Water needs to be in two sources: drinkable water, potable water, and non-potable water. All of these water things you see outside shouldn't be drinking water. So that's that. In terms of trains and transportation, we should be moving people inland for good reason right now. So that's that. And, well, California is a very dry place, and it always has been. So forest management is key. It needs to be taken very seriously, and there probably needs to be a reallocation of funds in the state to manage our forestry.
Thanks. I want to talk about three things. First, sea level rise. Over the last 100 years, our seas have only risen by about 8 inches, and the projections are to be 3 to 5 feet by 2100. So that's going to affect many businesses. It's going to affect our airports, our roads. Pretty soon, Mark Zuckerberg will need a rowboat to get to Facebook headquarters. And so, yes, I'm going to like that. I want to thank Dave Pine for his work. The Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, which was created. This is the first county level agency in the state to directly tackle sea level rise. We must implement integrated multi-benefit solutions for our shorelines, manage stormwater runoff, and mitigate flooding. Second, I want to talk about PG&E. PG&E has disproved the old adage of too big to fail. They are too big and they're failing. They're actually also managed to not prevent fires and also have power shutoffs. We are all running to replace Senator Jerry Hill. And Senator Jerry Hill has done a lot of amazing things. One of them is holding PG&E accountable. And I commit to continuing that work to hold PG&E accountable. Last, carbon removal. We need to do it through smart forestation. We need to do it, as I talk about my climate plan, through agriculture technology and through soil restoration. And we need to do it by looking at things like carbon negative building materials. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So for me, the issue, the question on sea level rise defense is a personal one. The city of Burlingame, 1/3 of our revenue, the revenue that pays for our police, our parks, our sidewalks, 1/3 of that revenue comes from companies that are within about 2 feet of the bay. So if you have 2 feet of sea level rise and a king tide and a storm surge, 1/3 of my economy is underwater. So that's an existential threat to our city. 2 years ago, because of seeing this coming, I started a working group to begin thinking, how are we going to defend ourselves? Oh, and by the way, that fact base is unique to Burlingame, but the same threat, the same story can be told in South San Francisco, in Redwood City, in San Mateo, in East Palo Alto. So we absolutely have to get ahead of this. We have to know how we're going to defend ourselves. And that's why, so I love Dave Pine. I love the fact that he also created Peninsula Clean Energy. I wish he had come up with a better acronym for the Flood and Sea Level Rise District, FASLROD or something. I'm not sure. I have a hard time with that, but it's really smart because what it does is it puts us all together planning, because it's no good me protecting my lands and then have a bunch of water come in from Millbrae, right? We all got to do this together, and then lobbying together, we can go to Washington and get the kind of infrastructure money we're going to need. That's the practical solution. If there's one thing I hope you take away, is these issues need practical solutions, hard choices, and practical decision making. And that's what I have. Thank you.
All right, so that question really wasn't intended to be the Thank Dave Pine question, but I do appreciate your nice comments. So we're going to just take a little different approach here now and do some quick yes/nos. I know it can be difficult for candidates, but We have 4. I thought we'd maybe do 2 now and maybe 2 towards the end. So I think, Shelley, you are the next person. And this is the yes/no for the panel. So Governor Newsom recently announced a moratorium on issuing permits for hydraulic fracking. Should the legislature ban fracking entirely?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes, and oil licenses too.
Bending the rules there. And Sally.
Yes, absolutely.
Our next yes/no, starting with Alex. Do you support the divestment of fossil fuel holdings by the state teachers and public employees retirement systems?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm going to say yes, but we need to be given the fact that we have significant
We'll go with
pension.
yes, but we'll just go with
I just want to say that it needs to be over time because there's a significant pension liability and
Okay.
we can't bankrupt it.
We gotta try to keep it yes/no.
Sorry.
As I say, I know how hard it is. Okay, we now going to move to a next set of questions where we'd like to try to keep the answers to a minute so we can cover a few more. So I think we're at, let's see, we're at Josh. Okay, well this is a question I think is on many people's minds. The lack of housing has major climate, habitat, and land use impacts as people are forced to commute long distances. They cannot live near their work. What is your position on Scott Wiener's SB 50 bill, as recently amended, to encourage more housing near transit and job centers? And right about Josh, thank you.
Sure. So we see how a lot of these issues are related. We do have people commuting now multiple hours from the San Joaquin Valley. I did an event with Josh Harder. He said there are 85,000 people that commute from his district to our district. That involves a couple things. One, we've approved way too many jobs and not enough housing to keep up. So what it means is, yes, so those well-paid tech workers are pricing out our teachers, our nurses, and others who make up our dwindling middle class. So I say that, first of all, if you're a company over 1,000 employees, for every new job rec that you create, you should have to you should have to fund a unit of housing to go along with that. It won't solve the problem, it'll stop it from getting worse. We need a massive, I don't support, and I haven't supported SB 50, and here's why. I talked about why we need the other part of the solution. Sorry, no, we'll talk about it a little more. But we need a massive amount of money for affordable housing. That's what we need to focus on.
So I gotta say, tough transition to make this one the one where you go to 1 minute. Housing in 1 minute. So I'm against SB 50. I think it's the right diagnosis. I think it's the wrong prescription. I don't agree with top-down zoning by Sacramento. I think we can work with each city to make sure that there is zoning that's appropriate. And I do understand that that's part of the new ideas for SB 50, but I think as a general matter, I just don't appreciate the highly prescriptive approach. In our city, I'm proud. We haven't built a stick of new housing in 40 years. We just approved a general plan that is going to grow our community by 20% in 10 years. We're going to build a whole new neighborhood in Burlingame. You think that was easy? It wasn't easy. I got plenty of people who say, I do not want big buildings and more traffic. But when you show people where the teacher's going to be, where the nonprofit provider's going to be, where our kids going to be, then people lean in. And we did it in a way that respects single-family home neighborhoods, doesn't expect changes there. We're going to create a whole new neighborhood near BART, near Caltrain. We're taking an old industrial area and rezoning it for housing. That's the right way to do this. Thank you.
I feel like SB 50 is very well intentioned, and we need to look for mechanisms to call for greater accountability on the part of the cities to build the housing that we really need. But I am troubled by the fact that there is so little overlap with affordable housing in the accountability that's provided for in SB 50. And I think that instead of just allowing one piece of legislation to suck all the oxygen out of the room, that we need to have multiple bills that do things like provide some accountability for our public agencies in terms of their surplus properties and surface parking lots, and make sure that we have a range of housing, including very compact housing, that is transit accessible, that's linked to small business, that's responsible in terms of its proximity to schools and services.
So I'm going to be the outlier on this one. Last year, when Senator Wiener proposed SB 50, I was part of a group. Did I startle you? Sorry. I was part of a group of elected officials who talked to him about changes. And when I was talking to him about getting his support in this race, he read my response in the Daily Post about what I thought should change to SB 50. One was don't exempt small counties. And two, because they are contributing to this as well. And two, give cities a limited amount of time to develop their own transit-oriented plans. And then if they don't do that, then the provisions of SB 50 kick in. So those changes have been accepted and they're now in the bill. I do also want to talk about the affordability requirement because he has also, unlike the first iteration, included affordability. 15 to 25% is in SB 50 now, as well as some very strong anti-displacement provisions and access to new affordable housing in the bill. So I do support it in this revised version.
I oppose SB 50 in all its forms and previous and future forms. The problem, we have too many jobs and not enough housing. Stop creating so many jobs here. Stop zoning them in. Greedy little local councils and organizations that want the revenue from it zone these things they should never zone. 1 million new square feet right next to Highway 101 in Santa Clara. Who thought of that? And 5,000 new people on one exit every morning. All right, so I believe in local zoning. I don't believe in top-down zoning. We don't need central planners. We do need transportation. We are the 4th largest metropolitan area in the country. You may not realize that. We're not a little quiet, cozy place. We need a real transit system, and we don't have one. You could pretend you're building near a transit hub. It isn't a transit hub. You can't get from here to there on public transit.
Right, we'll move on to Mr. Brownrigg for the next question. So PG&E's public safety power shutoffs have affected hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses and caused serious disruption in people's lives. So what is the appropriate role of public safety power shutoffs, and what should the state do to protect residents as we continue to face wildfires?
Well, the first thing we should do, and I said this over a year ago, is change the ownership structure of PG&E. It should no longer be an investor-owned utility. It lost the prerogative to do that. One of the benefits of converting it into either community ownership or state ownership is the 10.5% net profit margin that they're promised. 10.5%, for those of you in business, to be promised that, man. So that's a lot of money we can put into improving the grid. There are investments that can be made to make this grid safe. SoCal Edison did this years ago. That's why they haven't had this kind of conflagration record that PG&E has. So we should, in the meantime, we have to create more distributed power. We have to help PG&E lean into improving the networks that's there, no matter who owns it. And then I think we have to look at microgrids. And microgrids can be much more resilient and protected against storm and other winds. But the bottom line is, the folks down south, they fixed this problem. They don't have fires like this.
Okay. Well, those folks down south also have a completely different type of vegetation than we have in Northern California, so that's part of the mix as well. But there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that PG&E has been responsible for death, for injuries, that they have been errant and moralless in the way that they've approached business, and there is absolutely no excuse for it. They've said that they want to have 10 years of public safety shutoffs, which we cannot allow. And we have to start planning for an energy future that is locally generated, locally stored power. Now, when we talk about reforming the grid, rebuilding the grid, etc., that's a very complex question. Our grid was built a long time ago for a small number of constant inputs. We now, thanks to community choice aggregation, to renewable providers, many of whom are small entities, many different sources of energy coming into the system, providing power that is variable. And we have to plan for that as our future.
Yes, sorry. So we certainly have to look at diversification of our supply, because not only is that an issue about the accessibility of power, but it's also an issue about climate, because if we're having a diverse energy sources that are carbon neutral, then we're going to be addressing our climate goals as well. Second, we have to think about how we're going to store that, and the storage is critical. So even for those of us who get our power from Peninsula Clean Energy at 100% renewable, we're still getting our power on PG&E lines. So we're still subject to power shutoffs. So we need to figure out how we're going to store locally, but we also need to figure out how are we going to upgrade that grid. And as far as PG&E itself, I just will take a second to address that. I had a conversation with Senator Hill about the idea of moving it from an investor-owned utility to a community-owned utility. His concern was that then the community is on the hook for all of the debt that PG&E has accumulated, because that debt is not going away anytime soon.
Thank you.
This is an extremely complex problem, not easily solved, that requires a lot of capital, potentially. First problem is, you have people living in the boonies. They want power. We want them to have clean power. So how do we run power through a forest? Well, you could start by clearing out half the forest, but that's not really what we want either. So, what we're looking at is a lot of capital to clean up our antiquated power distribution system in the state of California that we are going to be taxing even further by moving all the heating to electricity, all the cars to electricity, and everything else to clean electricity. This problem's only getting worse. PG&E doesn't have competition, really. They should. They should go out of business in a miserable sort of way, and their investors should lose their money for doing such a poor job. That's how business works. Thank you.
PG&E has failed. PG&E's leadership and culture has failed. And I believe the investor-owned utility model has failed. It's been corrupted by the profit motive. And we've seen what happens when we don't have the profit motive. We've seen it with Peninsula Clean Energy. We see it with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. These are local, these are transparent, and they are being effective. And they're getting to 100% clean energy much faster than PG&E. The power shutoffs are unacceptable. And right now, we're using data at the state level to look and see at each power shutoff, what happened, what was the cause, should they have allowed it, and what should the territory have been. What we need is more microgrids. Guess who's blocked microgrids at the state level? PG&E. So that's one of my first bills, to make it easier to build microgrids. We're going to need a microgrid in each community in this district, so in a public place, so that if we have these power shutoffs, people in our communities have a place to go. PG&E has failed us.
Anybody like PG&E? So we'll start with you on the next question. Water is an increasing scarce resource in our state. How can we ensure that residents, industry, agriculture, and our ecosystems have equitable access to water? And how do you prioritize water use?
Well, I think that we need to get in much more aggressively to recycling of water, to water conservation, to stopping the use of toxic chemicals that pollute water and make it unusable for the future. And every time, as I said before, that we look at water use, water storage, water movement, we need to think about the energy that is inherent in that. So I think it's a double bottom line, and we have to restrict our use of water, and there are going to be some of the sources or users of water that are not going to be sustainable over time. You know that agriculture has a lot of power in the state capital, but we have to transition away from water-intensive uses and become more sustainable.
So, you know, I talked about water a few minutes ago, and one of the issues that we have here in California is that the water primarily falls in the north through our snowpack and through, but primarily through the snowpack, and then it's needed in the south. And so the transportation issue is a significant issue. The source of water is a significant issue. And so the diversification of our water supply needs to be a piece of how we're having this conversation. And I do agree, Redwood City was a leader in recycled water. We were one of the first cities to implement using recycled water for a whole variety of different uses that you didn't need potable water. And so to build infrastructure that allows us to use recycled water in a variety of places, I think is really critically important. And then to invest in technology that allows us to actually drink recycled water and use it in our cooking so that we can use it in a whole variety of different ways.
I touched on this earlier. First thing we need to think about is potable and non-potable water. Obviously, toilets and agriculture and your yard don't need drinking water. Secondly, we do need more water. In 2014, we allocated $7.5 billion in bond money for water storage. Where did that money go? So, water storage, and what comes along with water storage may be anathema to some of you. I don't think it is. Along with water storage in a dam comes clean hydroelectric power. Good thing. You have to be careful where you put it and how you put it. But hydroelectric power and water is a great thing. Farmers need water. Farmers do need to migrate to lower water usage, drip irrigation and things like that. They should not be sprinkling in the middle of the day, but they do need water. In fact, every ounce of water you give to a farmer goes back in the aquifer by definition. They don't waste it, it just goes back there. So we got a lot of capital need there.
I'd like to talk about three things. First of all, lead. We talk a lot about 5 parts per billion of lead or reducing that. I'm here to say there's no safe level of lead for our children. And just like I led the fight to ban a chemical and pesticides that was shown to cause brain cancer in kids, we had a bill in the state Senate, and I wrote an op-ed in the Mercury News. The governor then unilaterally banned that chemical. Just as I led that fight, I will also lead the fight to get lead out of our drinking water. With over 1 million kids who have unsafe levels of lead in California. Second, clean up our waterways and aquifers. Do you know we actually had no metering of water in many parts of the state? That's why you see the groundwater, the pictures from the Central Valley of things shrinking. I was a founding trustee of UC Merced. I spent 15 years on that board, and we spent a lot of time working on water issues. So my last point would be innovation. Innovation in agriculture. We use way too much water in agriculture today. We helped launch something, at Full Circle, we launched something called Imagine H2O. That is one of the leading organizations now in the state supporting water innovation today. Thank you.
I think this is a super important issue, and I've done a lot of work on it. And it's not the case that all the water goes back into the aquifer. If that were the case, UC Davis wouldn't find 80 billion gallons overdraft in the Central Valley aquifers every year. There's parts of the Central Valley that have subsided 10 feet as a result of the aquifer collapsing. So we absolutely have to restore it. I promised early on that I would find a way to get 150 billion gallons of water back into our rivers, back into our aquifers, and we do that by investments in agriculture. We can save 2.5, 3 million acre feet and help our farmers be more productive and use less pesticides with better irrigation. It sounds simple, and it is simple. It just takes some capital ahead of time, and we can make a huge difference in the amount of fresh water we leave in rivers for fish and leave available in the aquifer. So this is an opportunity. I told you I wanted to leave you with a sense of hope. This is an area where I am incredibly hopeful. It just requires some courage.
I'd like to ask another question that was prepared by one of our youth groups, and that's heirs to our ocean. Are they with us this evening? I think we have some representatives. And their question is, are you aware of the carbon sequestration benefits of ocean ecosystems? And if so, what are your plans to protect these fragile and crucial habitats from human impact? So I think, Shelley, yeah, let me read it. Yes, of course. So the Heirs to the Ocean is interested in your comments on ocean. What is the question? I'm going to ask you the question. They're interested in your comments and answering how do ocean ecosystems sequester carbon, and what would you do to protect those ecosystems?
So I hope you'll find me afterwards, because I'd love to hear a little bit more about sort of the details of carbon sequestration. But that being said, I think the big picture question is, how do we protect our oceans? How do we make sure that we don't continue to pollute them at the rate that we're polluting them? How do we make sure that we're not killing coral reefs? How do we make sure that the ocean species that we rely on for ecodiversity are not dying at rapid rates? And how do we work together to make sure that we have oceans that are habitable for the wildlife that live there? So I think, when you have questions like that, those are going to require us to both work at a state level to protect our coast, to keep it clean, but also to really fight back on the Trump administration and its rollback on all of the environmental protections that we have, as well as work with our partners across the world.
Last year, I heard a speaker at our Rotary Club, a scholar from Stanford, talk on this subject. The microorganisms and plankton that inhabit the vast oceans that cover our planet do play a role in CO2 and other very important things. The crux of what I got out of his talk was that they're still doing the research and they don't really know. They have the impression that it's very important. The details, however, are very complicated. What one would start by doing is funding the research to make sure that we are concerned with and know how the oceans impact all of the other issues we have. I don't worry just about CO2. I worry about pollution, and I worry about the ocean. There are a number of environmental issues to think about. Some are tied directly, some are indirectly tied. The oceans are 2/3 of our world, and we need to be very careful in how we treat them. Furthermore, if they collapse and we have a billion hungry people, that's another problem.
Yes, oceans are massive carbon sinks. And that's why we worry about the accelerating of, when you hear about feedback loops, things like, when the ice caps are melting and they're revealing more methane, which unleashes these horrible gases. And that's what we have to worry about. And that's why I think we're seeing the impacts of climate change much earlier even than scientists predicted. So I do believe We have to protect the oceans. I do believe, as Shelley said, we need to push back on the Trump administration. The Trump administration is trying to roll back every protection that we made in the Obama administration, including protections for the ocean. But ultimately, I think this one comes back to the overall climate question. We have to act now and urgently to prevent climate change, because then we hit these feedback loops, and it's going to accelerate even faster than anyone thought. Thanks.
I appreciate the question. I think it's incredibly important. The oceans off California are acidifying faster than many other places. We're losing our kelp beds. Australia is losing its great barrier reef. So we're killing the ocean. And it almost doesn't matter if it's a carbon sink or it isn't. It's going to kill us if we let that happen. So we absolutely can't. It really gets us back to why climate is so important, and pulling carbon out of the energy stream is so critical. I will use it as a second to say I also think plastic is critical. You heard me say I think we should have zero plastic to landfill. I'll go farther. We shouldn't allow people to make plastic that can't be recycled. If you want, it is appalling that we let people make those things, because then what happens is they go maybe to our landfill, but probably to Asia. And if you want to get sickened, you look at how those dumps of plastic are being handled. They're being set on fire. And when if they're not poisoning the villagers, then they're blowing into the ocean and adding to the pollution there. So we have to stop that.
You know, this is one of the great things about running for office is you get questions like, what will you do about the ocean? And when I was in the state assembly, one of the things that I did to take action on this was authoring legislation to create the Ocean Protection Council to ensure that all of our agencies that have a stake in ocean protection are working together effectively. And I want to agree 1,000% with Michael's comment about getting rid of the plastic, breaking the back of the throwaway plastic industry. And I think it was a tremendous advance that the legislature made a couple of years ago to stop allowing microbeads in consumer products. And before all these plastics came into being, life was okay. We got along without them. We were still humans without the microbeads. And we have to get back to that point in time. And we can never, ever, ever allow drilling off the California coast.
Okay, I'll move to you, Alex. So when you look at the audience tonight, for the most part, there are very few people of color. And what would you do to bring more diversity to the climate movement and to addressing the issues we've been discussing tonight?
I addressed a bit of this earlier, which is that 29% of the country believes these are issues, and most of the country doesn't. Part of including a community into a discussion means getting that community to the point where they understand. So there needs to be an outreach to these communities about the issues, and particularly about how the issues affect them. When people understand that they are part of the solution as well as being affected by it, they have more of a motivation to get involved. We do have an ethnic group here tonight that's mildly representative of the district, but not completely. That's a byproduct of a lot of factors.
Well, I'm glad. There's so much I want to say on this topic. I have like 85 pages of notes. So I'm glad we kind of came back, because to me, a lot of this comes back to workforce development. I've served the last 7 years. Governor Brown appointed me to the state workforce board, and a lot of our focus has been on green jobs. And I want to say, by the way, in our district, we have 11,000 clean energy jobs in energy efficiency and solar. And we have 500,000 residents have clean tech jobs already in California. So we're not going to succeed in our climate goals if we don't bring along the other 50% of the state that lives on, that makes $25,000 or less. I spent a lot of time in the Central Valley. I'm with these people, and one of the ways that we can break through, I think, is on workforce development. Now, the second thing is the Green New Deal. And I'm proud to have Ed Markey endorse my climate plan because I worked with him on the Waxman-Markey climate legislation in 2009. And I think the Green New Deal is the kind of document and vision we need. Thank you.
I think this is an incredibly important issue. And, I'm reminded of the Yellow Vest movement in France. And President Macron put in very high gas taxes with the notion that we're going to wean people off gasoline. And the Yellow Vest guys hit the streets and they said, the president cares about the end of the world, we care about the end of the month. So I think we need to remember that the environment is important for us environmentally, from a health point of view, from a moral point of view, but there's also a strong economic argument here, and there's a strong health argument. And we need to make sure that everyone feels included in these kinds of conversations, and there aren't fingers being wagged. This is a way that we come together and we solve this problem. Because like I said a few minutes ago, the world of the future where energy is ubiquitous, and it's clean, and it's cheap, is better for everybody. Better for everybody. So we need to make sure that everyone feels that their voices are heard and has a stake in this, and that, and that we don't make people feel like outsiders. Thank you.
Well, I think it's fantastic that 500 people showed up here tonight. That's absolutely amazing. And not everybody can. Folks who have small children, people who have homework tonight, people of modest means, in an area where transit is very, very, very expensive, can't be here. But they are showing up in the social media, they're showing up on Twitter, they're showing up to city council meetings. And so it's kind of a much more diverse picture than we've ever experienced, and that is impacting the environmental movement. I think the main point is that everybody who's here tonight cares about democratizing the benefits of the environmental movement, cares about inclusion of all different kinds of ideas in all the communities that are present in our area. And I just think that it's a complex picture. It's one that we need to work towards. One of the things that I'm very intent on is getting out to all of the parts of this very large district and making sure that I can get their ideas rather than expecting them to necessarily come to me.
So one of my commitments is to have a staff that looks like this district. And I think that's one place where you start as an elected official, when you get to have staff. And then, I think we also have to recognize sort of the underpinnings of a lot of this. I talked earlier about racist housing policy, and I think we have to understand that even unintentionally, racism has played a role in keeping people of color out of the environmental movement. And so it's incumbent on us to work to not just be inclusive, but to promote leaders of color who can help bring along their peers, who can speak for communities that I can't necessarily speak for, and who can be the representatives and the organizers for all of our various communities, not just here in the state, or not just here in this district, but across our entire state.
We're back to our next question. So it's about almost 10 of 9, so we'll wrap up the questions at 9 and give you a chance to make a final statement. Throw in a couple yes/nos too. So we've asked you a lot of policy questions tonight, and you've all had a lot of smart things to say. But what are the kind of personal attributes and skills that you will bring to the state senate that are going to allow you to be effective? And we're starting with Mr. Becker.
For me, I think it's my background. what I've done my whole professional life, bringing people together to solve big public problems. We need regional solutions to many issues like transportation and housing. And then we need massive investment to accomplish our climate goals. That's why I have this very detailed climate policy, and I urge you to look at it and take a copy. It's everything from buildings, it's everything from ag tech, it's everything from clean energy investment. And I built that with 73 climate endorsers were on that list, and it was a collaboration among them. And that's what we need. We're so fortunate to live in this district where we have so many great ideas. We have Stanford, we have researchers, we have inventors, and we need someone who's been in those shoes, basically someone who can bring those ideas up to Sacramento and knows how to accelerate and get things done. At this point, we know what needs to happen. We need someone with courage, and we need someone who has the ability to help implement and prioritize these things.
Thank you.
I feel fortunate to have spent the first third of my career as a U.S. diplomat. If you remember the testimony a couple of months ago of those fine American diplomats who were telling truth to power, then you know that training is training where you put service before self and country before everything. And so that's been my approach from the beginning. And I find that it works incredibly well on complex issues and even simple issues to get people and move the ball forward. I have a track record of doing this, everything from getting housing built in a city that hasn't built housing, to getting an affordable housing project built, to fixing El Camino, to getting new hospitals and parks approved and schools opened that were mired in lawsuits. So I think this is an incredibly important ability, and I like doing it. I like taking on tough issues. I like making sure people feel heard. I like making sure that people hear one another, and then I'm willing to make a hard decision. So I talk about the 4 C's of public service for me: courage, compassion, civility, and common sense. And I have found over the course of my 30 years in government that if you bring those 4 things into the room, and you follow the Japanese maxim, fix the problem, not the blame, you can get a lot of stuff done.
Well, this is one of the really hard questions when you're kind of invited to say, oh, I'm the best. And I think that everybody up here has fantastic ideas. The real ideas are going to come from you and come from people in the community, the real experiences. When I was in the Assembly, I can think of so many times when I based legislation on something that someone in the community told me about their lives. And I think that if I had any one strategy for getting along within the legislature and being very successful at getting my legislation through, it was in trying to help other people. So when I saw other members that had a bill that was in trouble, that wasn't getting over the top, going to them and saying, what can I do to help in this situation? So that I had folks to help me when I had a difficult bill. And environmental bills are often the most difficult pieces of legislation that you can be doing.
I started off tonight talking about my background as an organizer, as a fighter, as an advocate, as a former school board member, as a current city councilwoman and vice mayor. And all of those pieces put together have helped shape me into the type of public servant that I have become. I've dedicated my life to working in nonprofits and community service. And the reason I want to go to Sacramento is to take all of this experience that I've had locally while spending time in Sacramento advocating for a lot of the things that we all care about, and become that policymaker who is the representative of this district. And so some of the things that I've done at the state level include building coalitions of people who normally don't sit in the same room and talk to each other, bringing them together to agree on the things we're going to agree on and leave the things we disagree on outside so that we can make some recommendations. In this instance, it was around public education. And so building on all of that work and those skills, I think will make me an effective legislator.
Whether or not the skills I have make me the best, I don't know. But I can tell you what I am and how I think and what I use to approach problems. I have an education the best California can offer between Berkeley and Stanford. I've been taught to think pragmatically, logically, and scientifically. What you do when you doctor is you develop new knowledge. I know how to go out and create new knowledge. I know when I don't understand something also. I've learned to listen. I've been around long enough. I'm 56 years old. I've done a lot, but I know I don't know everything. I'm not the expert in everything. Along with what I've done and experiences and education I have, I'm confident enough, though, that once I've gone through the process, I will stick to my guns and do what I think is right. I don't have an axe to grind. I'm pragmatic. What I've done all my life is work to solve problems. And in my line of work, it has to work, you know? Someone's going to turn it on. And if it doesn't work, you have a problem. So I'm used to that.
Okay, I'm going to move to these yes/no questions. Actually, one is maybe a one-word question, one-word answer. So we are at Michael. So the proposed high-speed train connecting San Francisco and LA has proven to be expensive and difficult to construct. Should California continue to pursue this project? It's really a yes, kind of a yes/no if we could put you in that difficult position.
I've said no for 10 years.
Okay.
No, it's a giant boondoggle.
Maybe.
We should rapidly kill it.
No, in 2010 I said
Okay,
it was
thank you.
not working, it has not.
All right. Then the next one is, should nuclear energy be part of California's future energy mix? And we're at 7.
We actually have enough. We don't need it in California. We have enough alternatives.
I'm going to say no as well.
Yes.
So yes, all of the above energy plan.
Yes, you can't be serious about it.
Okay.
Climate.
So our final brief question before your concluding remarks. Shelley, what's your favorite state park?
Gosh, really? Well, I'll choose a park close to home. Well, Big Basin.
Muir Woods.
That's close enough.
Golden Gate.
For camping, Butano State Park.
You know, I like Hutter.
Well, I like Pinnacles. I don't know if that's state or federal, but it's just a wonderful place with the condors, and I love the beach.
So we don't have a consensus on the parks. So this will bring us to the conclusion of the forum tonight. But we do want to give each candidate, a minute to make any final remarks. You've learned a lot about them and their positions tonight, but we will give each a minute to wrap up. And we are at Alex, I think. In terms of you can start.
Germany was aggressive and showed leadership. They tried to get to a goal and they failed, but they still got a 32% reduction. I'm disappointed that it wasn't California showing leadership to the world. We talk and we talk and we talk and we can't get from here to there. Democrats can't seem to get from A to B and the Republicans don't cooperate. 29% of the country doesn't think it's a problem. So, for us to move to decisively and quickly on this matter, we need to include education and promotion as part of the environmental agenda. It isn't just about better windows and better cars. It's about transforming the way people think about how they interact with their environment in a more positive and enduring sort of way. Whether or not we do what we need to do has great consequences. We need to take this very seriously, not be judgmental, not be self-righteous about it, but look at it from a position of love and improvement.
You know, I've sat in this auditorium many times watching my daughter perform. So it's a source of pain and a source of inspiration that we're having this debate here. And I just can't wait for her and all her friends years from now to talk about how we averted the climate crisis and what we did to avert it. I think I'm the best person to bring these ideas to Sacramento. I've committed much of my adult life to this issue. I've attacked it from the nonprofit sector, from the government sector, from the for-profit sector. And I think it's significant I have the governor's support because I've worked with him for 20 years. I know his head of EPA for 20 years. I've known the head of the Natural Resources Department for 20 years. And that's what it's going to take. Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, the first elected woman in Africa, Democratic elected woman, she said, if your dreams don't scare you, you're not dreaming big enough. So I have big dreams for California. We can do this. We will do this. I appreciate you all being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you all for sticking with us. I admire your tenacity. So look, these issues aren't easy. If they were, they'd be solved. I think if you want to know if somebody can be effective in government on issues you care about, you have to ask, have you already been effective? I've spent 30 years getting hard things done. We broke ground on a project last month that will build 132 units of affordable housing in the heart of our downtown, 82 for people making 50% of area median income. Not easy. I helped lead compromises in my city that opened new schools, expanded daycare, created new detox centers, and created new parks and open space. I wish we had talked more about waste tonight. I led the Zero Waste Working Group, and we're putting 100,000 homes on a path to zero waste. I hope I can earn your support. Together, we can put California on a path to zero carbon energy, zero plastic to landfill, clean water for every child, and a much brighter future for our kids and our planet. I get it, and with your help, I'll get it done. Thank you.
I want to once again thank our organizers of tonight's event and thank everyone for being here and for hanging in through this. You still look energized and enthusiastic about the topic, which is exciting. I do want to invite you to share your advice with our campaign, to be a part of our campaign. Our website is at votesally.org. Very easy to remember, just votesally.org. And, you know, this is a unique election. It's coming up very early for the first time, the March primary. And it's important to engage because there are a lot of folks in the community who don't realize that the election is coming and that it's going to be an all mail-in ballot for the first time in both counties. So I want to make sure that we do everything in our power to get you engaged in our campaign or another campaign. And again, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. As Californians, we all believe that everyone has basic rights, including clean water and clean air, affordable housing and transportation, and a safe and healthy environment. I've spent my whole life defending and protecting the rights of people who need it, and right now what needs our protection the most is the environment. That's why my 14 years of experience being elected locally are an important piece of this puzzle in moving forward in Sacramento. California is the beacon of hope right now, and our legislators are working every single day to make sure that we have a strong California that is possible for all of us to live in. I know I can build on this experience that I have locally, build on the support I have in Sacramento, the 160 local elected officials. If you want to see who they are, you can just go to ShelleyMasur.com. And I hope that I can count on your support to help get there, help protect the environment, and help solve the climate crisis for California. Thank you so much.
So That brings us to the conclusion of the forum. Once again, big hats off to all the organizers and groups that came together to make this happen. It's not often that 400 or 500 people gather to talk about policy matters, and I don't know if we've had so many people talk just about climate and the environment. So we appreciate your being here and your concern and focus on this. And of course, finally, we thank our candidates for their participation.